In the space of just a few short years, a silent, invisible killer swept across an entire continent and wiped out as many as half of all the people living in it. No army did this. No war, no famine, no natural disaster. It was a disease, one so fast and so merciless that a person could feel perfectly healthy at breakfast and be dead before the week was out. It is the deadliest pandemic in all of recorded human history, and people at the time had absolutely no idea what was killing them or how to stop it. They called it the Great Mortality. We call it the Black Death. So what exactly was it? And how did it kill so many, so quickly? For centuries, no one had the faintest clue what caused it. People blamed bad air, angry planets, and the wrath of the heavens. But the real killer was something none of them could ever have seen, a single, tiny bacterium called Yersinia pestis. Just one of these microscopic organisms is far too small to see, but together, in their billions, they could shut down a human body in a matter of days. The truly frightening thing is that this little bacterium had everything it needed to become one of nature's most efficient killers, a way to travel, a way to hide, and a way to spread faster than anyone could run. And in the 1300s, the world unknowingly handed it the perfect opportunity. For a long time, where the Black Death actually began was a complete mystery. But in 2022, scientists finally cracked it. By studying ancient graves and pulling tiny fragments of DNA from the teeth of people buried nearly 700 years ago, they traced the very origin of the pandemic to a small trading community in what is now Kyrgyzstan, in Central Asia, around the year 1338. The gravestones there even recorded that the people had died of an unknown pestilence. From that remote spot, the disease began creeping outward along the busy trade routes that connected the east to the west, the same roads that carried silk, spices, and silver. Trade had made the medieval world richer and more connected than ever before. And now those very same routes would carry death. Here's how the killer actually got around, and it's almost absurdly small. The bacterium lived inside fleas. The fleas lived on the backs of black rats. And the rats, in turn, loved to live aboard ships and in the cargo of merchant caravans. When an infected flea bit a rat, the rat would die. So the hungry flea would simply leap to the nearest warm body, which was often a human. One bite was all it took. And the disease had a second, even more terrifying trick. In its lung form, it could spread directly from person to person through the air in a single cough. A flea, a rat, a boat, and a cough. That was the entire delivery system for the most devastating plague in history. In 1347, the plague arrived at the gates of Europe, and one of history's most chilling legends was born. According to the story, a Mongol army was besieging the Genoese trading port of Kaffa on the coast of the Black Sea when the plague broke out among their own soldiers. So, the tale goes, they loaded their plague-ridden dead onto catapults and hurled the infected corpses over the city walls. One of the earliest accounts of biological warfare. Now, many historians today doubt this gruesome story ever really happened. But what we know for certain is this. The Genoese merchants fled Kaffa by ship, sailing home across the Mediterranean. And hidden in their cargo, among the rats and the fleas, the Black Death sailed right along with them, straight into the heart of Europe. And once it took hold of a person, the Black Death was horrifying. It usually began like a bad fever, chills, aches, and exhaustion. But then came the sign everyone dreaded most, painful, swollen lumps, often turning dark, that appeared in the armpits, the neck, and the groin. These swellings were called buboes, which is where the name bubonic plague comes from. Victims burned with fever and grew delirious, and a great many were dead within just 3 to 5 days of the first symptom. The sickness was so swift and so widespread that, in the worst-hit towns, there were simply not enough living people left to bury the dead. It is thought that the dark, grim nature of it all is exactly why later generations gave it the name we still use today, the Black Death. The most helpless part of the whole tragedy is that the medicine of the time was completely powerless against it. Doctors genuinely believed the disease was caused by foul-smelling, bad air, or by an unlucky alignment of the planets, or as a punishment from above for human sin. Their treatments were useless and sometimes harmful, draining people's blood, applying strange herbs and pastes, or burning sweet-smelling fires to purify the air. None of it did a thing. Some people tried to flee to the countryside. Others simply locked their doors and prayed. And the doctors themselves, brave as many of them were, caught the plague and died right alongside their patients. Against an enemy they couldn't see and didn't understand, humanity was, for a time, almost completely defenseless. As the death toll climbed into the tens of millions, society itself began to crack under the strain. Gripped by terror, some people turned to extremes. Groups known as flagellants marched from town to town whipping themselves, believing the pain might persuade the heavens to lift the plague. But fear also brought out something much darker. Desperate to find someone to blame for an invisible horror they couldn't explain, frightened mobs turned on innocent minority communities and carried out terrible, shameful acts of violence against people who had done nothing wrong. It is one of the grimmest chapters of the whole tragedy. Trade collapsed, fields went untended, and entire villages were abandoned and left to crumble. For a few dark years, it must have felt to many as though the world itself was ending. But here is the surprising twist in the story. Out of this unimaginable catastrophe came changes that reshaped the entire Western world. With so many workers dead, those who survived suddenly found themselves in enormous demand. For the first time, ordinary peasants and laborers could bargain. They could ask for higher wages, better conditions, and more freedom, and if one lord refused, they could simply walk to another who wouldn't. This shattered the rigid medieval system that had bound peasants to their land for life, helping to crack the foundations of feudalism itself. Workers gained new power, wages rose, and the old order began to give way. In a strange and bitter irony, the deadliest disaster in history also helped lay the groundwork for a freer, more modern Europe. It would take around 200 years for the population to fully recover. So, the disease that killed half of Europe was not a curse or a punishment from the stars. It was a tiny bacterium carried by a flea, on a rat, on a ship, a perfect, accidental storm that the connected medieval world never saw coming. And here's a final thought to leave you with. That very same bacterium, Yersinia pestis, still exists in the world today. The difference is that now, a simple course of antibiotics can cure it in days. What once erased half a continent is, in our time, an illness we can usually treat. The Black Death is a haunting reminder of how fragile and connected our world really is, and of just how far human knowledge has carried us since. If you found this fascinating, hit like and subscribe. There's a new story every week. And I'll see you in the next one.